Okay, pictures. Now, I don't have a dog and pony show, I have a giraffe and lion show. So here we go. Now, most people who come to Kenya don't come to do mission work. They come to see the beautiful wildlife. And this is George, our favorite giraffe. He's at Nakuru National Park, and he's eating his favorite food, the leaves of the acacia tree. Kenya is world-renowned for having the best animal parks in the world. So you can go and see wonderful animals. If you want to take a vacation, it's not cheap, but if you want to take a vacation and you have a little money, go to Kenya, go to see the wildlife, then come to Muleshoe Methodist Hospital and see how the Lord's work is being done there. We also have lots of cats in Kenya, and these are cheetah. And you might know that cheetah is the fastest animal in the world, can run up to 80 miles an hour. These guys had probably killed an impala, and so they're well fed today, and now they're resting under this bush to keep out of the hot African sun. We also have lions in Kenya, and everybody wants to see a lion when they go on safari. This pride of lions had about 8 lions in it, and we took a picture focusing in on this male that's the head of the pride. And you know how you can tell a male lion? Most people think the mane is the best way to tell a male lion. That's a popular misconception. The best way to tell a male lion is the pot belly that's characteristic of the male of all species. And that's because the male lions are lazy. They don't go out and do anything. They let the women go out and do the work for them. So this lady and a couple of others, that's why she's laying down tired. She went out and she killed a wildebeest or a zebra, but then she steps aside. She and the other ladies wait because the women have prepared the meal. The men get to eat first. So this guy, he'll go up and of course he'll eat the best parts and as much as he wants until his belly is so distended he can barely drag himself away from the kill. And then he flops down and goes to sleep until it's time for his next meal. Or watches the Rangers on baseball. Now we also have, occasionally we have people who come to church and don't give good donations, so we have to feed them to the lions as an example to others. We also have elephants in Kenya. And elephants are an endangered species because people are trying to kill them for the ivory, poachers. And so we have men who go out and find orphan elephants. And when they find the orphans, obviously they can't survive as orphans on their own. They're brought here to Nairobi. This is the Nairobi Animal Orphanage for young animals. And when they're about 3 to 4 years old, they'll be taken back to the wild to a herd of elephants that takes care of orphans because they were all orphans themselves. Now, I'm a grandfather and you are a captive audience, so here are my grandkids. And this is Ethan, who just turned 7, and Lily, who will turn 9 very soon, and they live in McKinney. So we spend most of our time in McKinney while we're itinerating to our churches.
We don't spend most of our time there.
Well, we spend some time there, right. Occasionally, between churches we spend. So, and of course, one picture is never enough for grandfather, so here's another picture of our grandkids. Okay, meanwhile, back in Kenya. Here's Kenya here on the east coast of Africa. It's on the Indian Ocean, and Africa is a big place. It's about 4,500 miles up and down, and across it's about 4,500 miles as well. And so if a lot of people say, well, I know somebody in Africa, do you know them? Well, there's 650 million people living in Africa, and we probably don't know them, but it wouldn't hurt to ask. In any case, Kenya is a big country, and it's about the size of Texas if you cut off everything above Muleshoe. So it's a pretty big place, and it has 43 million people living in it. And you'll notice the equator runs right through the middle of Kenya. Muleshoe Methodist Hospital is in Muleshoe, which is right here, just 17 miles north of the equator. This is Meru National Park. And if you remember the book Born Free, or the movie, Elsa the lioness was born and raised in Meru National Park. And Muleshoe is right on the border of Meru National Park. So that's where we are located. We're about 300 kilometers, which is about 200 miles from the capital of Nairobi. Most Kenyans are Christians. About 85% of the people are Christians. The early missionaries did an excellent job of spreading the good news of Jesus Christ. Now, this particular picture was taken in St. Joseph's Methodist Church in Muleshoe. This is our home church while we're in Muleshoe. So it's a Kenyan tradition, and it's also a biblical tradition that when we visit a church, we bring you their greetings. So I bring you greetings from St. Joseph's Methodist Church in Muleshoe. And of course, we're going back in June for vacation, so we're going to worship there. Would you like me to take your greetings back to St. Joseph's? Yes. Thank you. I will do that. And wonderful. They always like to hear greetings from people around the world. We also have Muslims in Kenya. Whoops. About 11% of our people are Muslims, and about 4%, advancer isn't working, there we go, about 4% are traditional worshipers. They worship the gods of their ancestors. But many of them are also accepting Christianity, and that's one of the evangelism ministries at Maua. Now, Maua is in the mountains. We're at 5,600 feet, and the mountains around us are about 7,000 to 9,000 feet. And notice that we're a farming area. Farms are the basic way of living there. Some people have jobs in the city, but even those would have a small farm. Now, one of the problems we have with farms is the size of the farms. When men get old or when men die, their farms are given to their male heirs. Sorry, ladies, you cannot inherit land in Kenya. It's against the law. So the man gets too old to farm, or he dies, and his farm is split up among his male heirs. And the families are pretty large, so that's been done for generation after generation. So presently, the farms in our acre are less than farms in our area are less than 1 acre on the average. So obviously, you can't grow a lot of food on 1 acre. Many of our farmers are peasant farmers. Basically, they only grow what they eat, and they don't have any cash. And farmers live in small houses, like the one you see here, dirt floors, no electricity, no running water, wood sides, sometimes wood and mud, and this has a thatched roof, but sometimes they have corrugated steel roofs. Notice that the families are pretty large. The average family size was about 12 children about 15 years ago, but the birth rate has decreased dramatically. It's about 5 to 6 children in the average size family today. We went to a small farm right outside of Maua, about maybe less than a mile, and took a picture of a farm to show you the crops that are grown. And this is banana tree, and notice that there's bananas growing there. Bananas are a good food, and you can eat them. They're good food, and you can sell them in the market. And when you sell them, you make a little cash, and you can use that to buy kerosene for your lanterns, or to buy clothing or other household things that you might need. So almost all farmers grow some bananas. And they also grow for their main food maize, which is feed corn, and also beans. So the maize and beans here, this is the main food source for this farmer. Now this particular farm was 2/10 of an acre, and that's not unusual in the Maua area. So this family has to exist on what you grow on 2/10 of an acre. Now we do get 2 growing seasons if there's a good year. So they get 2 crops a year. And in a good year, they'll be able to feed themselves on that amount. However, in a bad year, obviously they're going to be suffering. And even in a good year, they're not going to have any cash because they eat what they grow. And so when their children get sick with malaria, they come into the hospital, they have no cash to pay for their hospital bills. This is Maua on a Saturday, and you notice there's lots of people coming in to shop. Maua has about 110,000 people living in it, and if you drew a circle of a radius of about 25 miles, there are about 1 million people living within 25 miles of Maua. So we are that commercial center for that area. This is something you don't want to do in Maua. You do not want to get on one of these motorcycles. We've seen up to 6 people, 2 on the front and 4 on the back, and they're not designed to handle 6 people. These guys, they don't even watch the road. Look, he's looking at my car over here. So basically, don't get on one of these or you'll be an accident waiting to happen. Maua Methodist Hospital was started in 1928 by the British Methodist Church. And we are still the only major medical facility for our area. So we serve the medical care needs of about 1 million people. We have a 275-bed hospital, and we have about 110,000 outpatients and about 13,000 inpatients every year. So we save tens of thousands of lives every year. My wife's job, well, you probably remember when we first went to Maua, her job was to teach at the School of Nursing. We went there for 5 years. Then we left and came back to the U.S. to do missionary work here for a few years. Then we went back to Maua, and she was in charge of quality improvement. Now, my wife learned to do quality improvement right here in Muleshoe. When the Muleshoe hospital started, my wife was in charge of the quality improvement department. And then we went to Irving before we went to Kenya. She was in charge of quality improvement at another hospital. So she was very well trained to do quality improvement. And that's a new thing in Kenya. And they don't have many people who know how to do it, so they needed a missionary. Here you can see our hospital is receiving the award for having the best quality improvement department in the eastern region of Kenya. Now, when we left Kenya, Jerry had trained a Kenyan nurse to do her job, and most missionaries do that. When you go there, you do a job and then train someone locally to do the job after you leave. My job at the hospital, originally my job was to start the computer department. And Brian Cox, you sent a computer over there with us to start the first computers at Muleshoe Methodist Hospital. They didn't have any computers when we got there, and so we shipped over computers, some from here in Muleshoe, some from Midland, some from Irving, and we took them and started the computer department. But after 5 years, we had trained Kenyan men to replace me. So I was no longer needed to do the main work. And so when we went back to Kenya for the second 5 years, I spent most of my time working in the accounts department, working with the special funds, and also working with mission work teams and projects there. And when I left, someone was trained to replace me as well. This is our outpatient and administration building. It was built by mission work teams. Mission work teams from the United States have built many of the buildings on our hospital compound. If it weren't for support from the United States and the mission work teams, our hospital couldn't continue to exist. The British Methodist Church and the United Methodist Church of the United States provide most of the funding to help this hospital keep running because we charge very low fees. We can't afford to build buildings. We can't afford to do major expenses like buying new x-ray machines. Those are all done by donations. So even though we're able to support the hospital staff by what we get from patient fees, we're not able to build buildings. And that's a very important part, of course, of a hospital. We also get grants from churches and agencies. This particular building is our maternity and surgical complex. The German and Dutch governments gave us $800,000 to build this building in 1995. We have many women who come in who need C-sections. Now, of course, women give birth very often at home or in a traditional birth center in their village. But very often they will also have problems. They'll need a C-section. And so they'll be rushed into our hospital, and we know that 2 people are going to die unless we give them free care. Because many of these women come from families that don't have any money. The child and the mother's life depend on donations. So we take money from that service fund that is sent to us to save the child and the mother's life. As I said, we have many births, about 230 a month, and about half of them are C-sections. And what we do is we pay for their bills. Well, first we go to their village. This lady had a C-section, and she's being kept here in the hospital in this room. This is our room for keeping the mothers who haven't paid their bills. Now, you might think that's unusual, but in the third world it's very common. We have a fence around the hospital. It's 19 acres, and we have a big fence around it. The main reason for the fence is to keep the patients in, not to keep the crooks out. Because our people are very poor, and they would just leave the hospital without paying their bill unless we insisted on it. So when this lady gave birth, we sent people to her village to check to see that her family didn't have any money. And in this case, her family was poor, so we paid for their bills from the service fund, and we released her back to her family. If we found out that she had money, we would keep her in this room until her family paid money. We've kept people for 2 to 3 months to get money from their family. It sounds strange, but we do that because we want to convince people that they need to pay for their bills. This is James, and he is preaching the good news on our pediatric ward. As a Christian hospital, of course, we want to preach the good news of Jesus Christ. And so every morning on each one of our wards, we have a service, and here is James preaching on the pediatric ward. So many people come to accept Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior due to the evangelism ministries of our hospital. This young man came in with a very serious case of malaria. Now, malaria is the biggest killer of children under 5 in Kenya. When you get malaria, it can get very serious. You can get pneumonia as well and become anemic. So this child became unconscious. When you get all 3 of those, you're going to be unconscious very quickly. And when you're unconscious with malaria, there's only a few hours for us to save your life. So this mother rushed her child into the hospital. Once again, she had no cash. We knew that. And so we paid for the care from that service fund. And here you can see he's unconscious, but he's getting his medication intravenously, and he's being fed by a nasal gastric tube because he can't eat on his own. He'll be in our hospital for 1 week, and it'll cost us $180 to save his life, and then he'll be ready to go home again. Here's a couple of the kids, if I can get this to work. Here's a couple of the kids that are recovering. This young lady has pretty much recovered and she's waiting to go home. This young lady still has a breathing apparatus because her pneumonia has hurt her breathing, and she'll be ready to go home in a few days. Notice that the mothers are also in the hospital with the children because the mothers do all the care other than the nursing care. They wash their clothes, they wash the children, they feed the children. We give them the food, but they actually feed the children. And the mothers and children live in the same bed, or stay in the same bed. We don't have a lot of beds. And so occasionally we have 2 mothers and 2 children in each bed because we have overcrowded conditions. But they're happy to be in the hospital, so they don't mind the fact that they share the same bed. Joseph was a young man who came in with a very serious case of malnutrition. Right, kwashiorkor. And he had that because his family did not grow a good crop. They had a drought, and so they didn't have enough food to feed him. And obviously, if they don't have food, they don't have money. So when Joseph was brought into the hospital, his care was paid for by donations to the service fund by United Methodist. Now, Clarissa was bit by a poisonous snake, and she was bit on the arm, and her arm swelled up to about double its size. And she was rushed into the hospital. Frankly, we didn't think we could save her life. She was very, very ill. We had medication to give her, but it just seemed like she was too far gone. But as a Christian hospital, of course, we pray for our patients. And Clarissa is one of those young ladies who we know God saved her life. Because although we cared for her the best we could, we didn't think it was possible. We think it was a miracle that God saved her life. And many people come in, we just don't feel we can save their lives, but we pray and God does it for us. And we're very, very happy for that, obviously. This is Miriam, who came into the hospital her mother came in to give birth. Her mother died giving birth. She had a brain embolism. And so nobody ever came in to claim Miriam, I'll get her name straight, to claim Miriam, and so we just kept her in the hospital as an orphan. We kept her for 9 months. Eventually her grandmother came in and claimed her, so she adopted her. Dennis is one of our favorite kids in the hospital because he was with us for 1 full year. He was brought into the hospital and left there as an orphan. Nobody ever came to claim him after he was brought in. And he was with us for 1 full year. And because it took us a long time to get his birth certificate and everything straightened out. And so we decided to have a birthday party for Dennis because we never had anybody in the hospital for 1 full year. And here he is cutting his birthday cake. And here he is eating his first piece of birthday cake. Now Dennis, we were fortunate we found an orphanage that was willing to take care of him. Nobody ever came to claim Dennis, but he went to an orphanage. Dorcas was a young lady who was an AIDS orphan. Her mother came to the hospital and gave birth but died of AIDS complication during childbirth. And her father had died months earlier due to AIDS. So Dorcas is now an AIDS orphan. And she was in our hospital for 9 months. AIDS is the biggest killer of adults in Kenya. Malaria kills most of the children. AIDS kills many, many adults. And so Dorcas was kept in our hospital for 9 months. Once again, her grandmother eventually adopted her, but we had to feed her by bottle feeding because there was nobody to feed her. Dr. Inoti is relatively new to our hospital. He's an eye surgeon. And we have many people in our area who are blind with cataracts, as Marshall knows. And when you get serious cataracts, you become totally blind. And this man had no hope for the rest of his life. He couldn't see anything. And he didn't have money because to get to Nairobi, which is the nearest place to get his cataracts removed, he'd have to pay for transportation and also for hospital care. But he had no money. So fortunately, Dr. Inoti, who is an eye surgeon, is now at our hospital, and we get donations to help these elderly men and women. So this man who was blind from cataracts was brought into our hospital, and for $50, was it $50, Jerry? He was healed, and now you can see he's praising God. There is hope in his life again. He was blind, and now he can see. Once again, mission work teams are vitally important to our hospital. This is a mission work team that came from St. Luke's United Methodist Church in Houston. They came in 2010, and they did a building project, which all mission work teams did. But while they were there, they heard about our problem with x-ray machines. We had 2 old x-ray machines that had broken down, and we could not get them repaired. We couldn't get parts. And so for 3 months, our hospital did not have an operating x-ray machine. And it was very difficult to run a hospital without one. They said, we're going to help you. So they went back to Houston after they did their project. They had a Christmas offering and raised $80,000. And they sent it to Malwa, and we bought this brand new x-ray machine. Now we have an x-ray machine that's reliable, that we can depend on, thanks to United Methodist missionaries who came to help us. Now we also had another problem at Malwa Methodist Hospital. As my wife wrote in her emails, the government raised all the salaries of all the nurses in Kenya, of the government workers, government nurses, and hired a whole bunch of extra nurses for government hospitals and government health centers. So our hospital lost about half of our nurses, and we were having trouble keeping nurses. Well, fortunately, while this was happening, there was a mission work team from Canadian UMC up here in Northwest Texas, and they said, we want to help you. So they went back home after their mission team, and they sent letters to all the mission team, all the churches in the Northwest Texas Conference. And they raised $135,000, $15,000 of which came from Muleshoe First United Methodist Church. And that's how you helped save us as well. Thank you very much. Because that money allowed us to raise the salaries of our nurses. We just didn't have the money to do it that year. About a year later, we were able to raise our rates and find out a way to pay the nurses. But for 1 year, we used those donations, your donations, to help pay these nurses. So basically, you helped keep our hospital alive by allowing us to hire nurses. So thank you for that very, very much. Excuse me? Oh, yes. And this is the young lady, this is Sabera McKenna, who replaced Jerry. She's the Quality Improvement Officer for Malwa Methodist Hospital right now. And by the way, this is Stanley Guittari. And if you write us an email, he's the email address that we will give you, that he will send you regular information about the hospital. He also writes the blog and the website. We have, as I said, an AIDS orphans program because we have over 40,000 AIDS orphans in the Malwa area. And AIDS orphans almost always end up living with their grandmothers. Just like grandparents here, the grandmothers love their grandchildren and they want to take care of them. But grandmothers have a very poor life. Grandmothers, there's no Social Security in Kenya, and grandmothers, because they're women, they can't inherit land. So they have a very, very small amount of food to eat. And now with AIDS orphans, they have to share that small amount of food. So there would be tremendous starvation and malnutrition in those families. So our hospital decided to reach out to help those AIDS orphans. So we started our AIDS orphans feeding and education program, and we started this advanced special for people to give money because the hospital can only support a very few number of kids. Now with support from many United Methodist churches, we feed 1,750 AIDS orphans through our AIDS Orphans program. But we need more money because there are many more AIDS orphans, so please also consider supporting that program. Now what we do is we ask the grandmothers to come in once a month and collect food. Building an orphanage is very expensive, so we didn't decide to do that. We couldn't help as many kids. So the grandmothers from each village come in to collect food once a month. We give them maize and beans. Then they take that food home to their homes and feed their family by cooking it in their homes. That's the best way to give food to the kids. Also, our kids need school uniforms because in Kenya, you must have a school uniform to go to school. It's the law. So these children who were AIDS orphans were not able to go to school. You notice they're 8, 9, or 10 years old. They hadn't gone to school because they had no school uniforms. Now that we're buying school uniforms, they can finally go to school. They'll start back at Standard 1, which is grade 1, and then they'll just keep going until they finish. But they're getting an education now thanks to our AIDS Orphans program. We also have AIDS Orphans Celebrations Day 3 times a year. We bring the kids in, we give them good food, we preach the good news of Jesus Christ, and just have a good time. This is a picture of some of the kids in our program. As I said, we have 1,750 of them, and notice those gorgeous smiles. They look great, they have school uniforms, they look well fed, but before they were in our program, they were malnourished, they didn't have uniforms, they were dressed in rags. They didn't have these gorgeous smiles because they felt they were rejected by the community. They didn't feel anybody really loved them or cared for them. Now you can see the Holy Spirit radiating from the gorgeous smiles from these happy kids. This is Florence, is that her name? No, Purity. Purity is one of our AIDS orphans who became a head of a household. Very often when you get older, the grandmothers will die or they'll get so old that they have trouble taking care of the kids. So now the older AIDS orphans in the families become heads of household and they have to find a job to support their younger brothers and sisters. And so Purity decided she wanted to be a tailor. Now we have a Hope Companions program that helps train young ladies and young men who are heads of household in whatever profession that they can choose. She decided she wanted to be a tailor. So we trained her as a tailor and bought her a sewing machine and bought her some fabric. And now she's a tailor and she can feed herself and her younger brothers and sisters thanks to her occupation. Our Hope Companions program has 2,000 families, heads of household of 2,000 families, and about 8,000 children, because there's an average of 4 children in each of these AIDS orphans families. So here are some of our Hope Companions, teenagers who are now heads of household and feeding and helping their young brothers and sisters. AIDS orphans live in houses just like the one you see here, and you can see it's in dirt and it's on a hillside, so there's water running through there in the rainy season, and we get lots of rain. About 55 inches of rain is a normal rain. And so our AIDS orphans live in very poor housing. They basically use just about anything they can get. Here you can see mud, sticks, burlap bags, plastic sacks, anything they can do to make a place more habitable. But obviously we want to help those AIDS orphans, and so we have our mission work teams are also helping them. This is a mission work team that came from Canadian, and all the mission work teams that come build one house for AIDS orphans while they're there in Muleshoe. And so they bring $2,800, that's what it costs to build an AIDS orphan's house. And so here you can see the members of the work team are working directly with the Kenyan people. The slab is already built when they get there. It takes them 3.5 days to finish the house. And when the house is finished, we dedicate the house to God, and we give them the key to the house, and of course we pray for the house in our dedication service. This is the Canadian team that built this house, and you can see it's a lovely home by Kenyan standards. It's 10 feet by 20 feet. It's on a good concrete slab, so they're not sleeping in the dirt and the mud. Has a good wood sides and glass and a good corrugated steel roof. So here's an excellent place for our AIDS orphans family to live. But our mission work teams also build hospital housing and do building projects at the hospital. This is a work team building the foundation of a home, and after they build the foundation, we use stones because they're very readily available. They're made to walls, and then finally, this is the final product. They built this house. Actually, this is a duplex, and it was built by work teams in 2 years. Actually, this is the house we lived in our second 5 years while we were in Muleshoe. Our mission work teams also do painting projects because we can't afford maintenance. So to make our hospital look good, they also paint the outside of the hospital. This is our current hospital project for our mission work teams. It's a 16 apartment complex, 4 stories, and notice that the bottom apartments are finished. There's 4 apartments there. We now have 8 Kenyan doctors living in these 4 apartments. Muleshoe doesn't have good housing, and the housing they do have is expensive, and there's a safety problem in Muleshoe because there's theft. And as a result, to get doctors and nurses and other qualified people to come to our hospital, we must provide good housing for them on the hospital compound. So if the mission work teams hadn't finished these apartments, we would not have those 8 doctors. So mission work teams are vital to the survival of our hospital. And notice that we don't have any OSHA in Kenya. So we would not put you out on those scaffolding. You would be falling off and be dead in a minute. It's the Kenyan men who do that work on the outside. You do inside work. So you'll be doing, if you go on a mission work team, you'll be building the inside, you'll be doing the walls, and you'll also be plastering the walls. Notice here is a picture of a young lady. She survived malaria. The only reason she was able to survive is because of donations in that service fund. So when you give money to help us at our hospital, when you send money to that, think of this young lady whose life you will be saving. Thank you for all the support you've been giving us all these years, and we pray that you'll continue to support us, and God bless you all. Do we have time for questions? Probably not.
Just a few.
Any questions? No questions? And my wife is going to talk to you during service too, so you get more time.
One question.
Yes, ma'am.
What is that? Is the first one?
No, yes,
The
ma'am.
first one, is that the biggest need?
That's the biggest need. Absolutely. That's by far the biggest need of the hospital. Number 1, the service fund. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.